Welcome everyone to session 3 of our study of prayer. This is not a comprehensive study, but it is one that tries to get into the meat and potatoes, the meaningful bits of prayer, the conversations that feel most important and that matter, that help identify and consider, and then help us to grow in our prayer. Today, we're moving into a conversation that's about prayer as a relationship with God. But before I get into some of the introductory comments, I just wanted to see if there had been any insights that people had been finding within themselves, whether it was through the discussion we've had so far, or anything in your prayer practice over the last week or two that has just added some type of insight to you as you've gone ahead. And it's okay if some of that's still, percolating. We can come back to it, and also just pay attention. That's all. Just note as things, shift in you, as we go forward with this, because there's such a practice, a praxis element to prayer. As we talked about in the beginning, it's not just an academic conversation here. It's really something to put into your heart and in your life. But as we move into then some of what we want to talk about this class, that whole idea of prayer as practice can mean a lot of things. And the reality of prayer is often different than our visions of what a prayer life would be. I mean, a lot of us perhaps set aside time for prayer, maybe every day. Maybe it's in the morning, maybe it's in the evening, maybe it's whenever you can. But how many of you can relate to this? You sit down for a practice of prayer and you're all set to go. And all of a sudden the phone rings and you're like, oh, who could be calling me? Who's calling me at this hour? And you have to go respond to it. Or maybe you sit down and there's no phone call, but you get yourself all settled and all of a sudden you hear that leaking toilet that's driving you batty. And you're like, oh, I can't sit and be present. I got to go take care of that. And then finally you find your elbows way in the tank. You realize there's a bad seal. You got to go fix that, and then the whole prayer session is ruined. Or maybe none of that happens and you sit down for a time of prayer, whatever that means for you. And all of a sudden your thoughts are everywhere as soon as you sit down. And it's like your body is centered, but your thoughts are like dust and they're blowing everywhere except here in the present moment and seemingly toward God. As we look at some of the greatest, theologians and mystics of history, even Mother Teresa writes that she used to shake her hourglass. She had this, I think it was 16th century hourglass that she would use for her prayer time. She would shake it, hoping to shorten the prayer time for her. Isn't that so awesome? And then even Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther, the German monk, was noted because he says, resolve to pray earnestly, and no doubt you will see how large an assortment of your own thoughts will rush in to distract you, so that you cannot begin aright. The greatest prayers of our time, or of history, have such profound struggle with this idea of prayer and what it looks like and what it means and all that. And maybe it just begs the question, then maybe there's no such thing as perfect prayer. Maybe there's no right way to prepare for prayer. Maybe there's just prayer. And maybe the main requirement for prayer is to sit down and just be honest as possible. That whole idea of whenever we approach God in prayer, go just as we are. We say that all the time, but that is hard to do, because how many of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, we're dealing with so many different burdens, right? So many different perspectives on ourselves. Some of us feel quite unworthy to approach God, to be with God, to kind of have a faith life, a prayer life. We feel burdened, we feel distracted, we feel these negative feelings, and we assume that somehow that makes us unworthy or just not ready to be in front of God, as if God won't pay attention to us if we're that sort of distracted, right? And we may smile at that, but I think there's something to it, because I've heard so many people say it. They say it about coming to church. I can't come yet because too many things in my life are just falling apart, and I got to get stuff straightened out so that I can come to church. Well, I think we say oftentimes the same thing about prayer. And I recognize that sometimes we're looking for any excuse we can to not do things that we know are good for us. I get that. That's human nature. But I also see in this, and I recognize in this, that if we're waiting to get straightened out and to get everything just set up right before we go in prayer, then what we're doing is we're turning away from the only source of our forgiveness and our healing. That's challenging. And it's like when we look at the Bible, all these stories of the Bible, we talk about this, I think, pretty often, but you see constantly how many countless examples of imperfect, so-called unworthy people approaching God in prayer and God responding. You've got hot-headed Moses, you've got petulant, childish Samson, you've got insolent Jonah, you've got that woman that's been shunned but crawls through the crowd and touches Jesus' cloak. You've got King Manasseh, the wicked King Manasseh, whose prayers desperately to God are responded to. You've got King David, who, after all he did, his prayers of repentance and forgiveness were answered by God. And he was a murderer and an adulterer. You've got Jesus lifting up these prayers of the tax collectors, the so-called unworthy ones in their society, even above the upright ones in the Pharisees. Okay, so we've got all these examples. Maybe the point of all this is that imperfect prayer and imperfect setups to prayer and all the distractions we face, maybe being, in those types of places does not disqualify us from approaching God. Maybe it's exactly what we need to approach God, but maybe the key is being honest about it. Really being honest about our distraction and our feelings of brokenness and unworthiness. Maybe that's our motivation for prayer. Maybe that's what helps us to remember that we are human and God is God. Okay. There's a classic book that I love that was recommended to me by my mentor that some of you are aware of. I mentioned it briefly last week. It's called The Cloud of Unknowing. It's a 14th century book that was written by an unknown English author. And in it, he says something quite profound. He puts it, before penetrating the cloud of unknowing above us, we may need to imagine a cloud of forgetting beneath us. And what I think he's referring to is sometimes we got to forget all those things, those failures, those reasons that we think we're not worthy, those distractions, those feelings of inferiority, all of that stuff. Just forget it. Don't tidy it up. Don't straighten it all out, but just breathe it out. Forget it. Let it go, in order to really open our minds to God. And as the author of this book says, because God can't fill in us that which has not been emptied. I just love that. It's like that story of the monk when the wise Western scholar comes up and wants to learn all the things about Buddhism and wisdom in Buddhism, the Buddhist monk. And he comes up to him and he's got all the knowledge. But when the monk tries to pour tea in his cup, the monk just keeps pouring tea and it's overflowing. And the guy's like, wait, why are you pouring so much tea in my cup? It's already full. And he said, yeah, and this is the problem. You've come to me seeking to find something, but you're coming so full of your own knowledge and your own awareness and your own thoughts. It's like you're not ready to receive. And maybe prayer is somehow connected to that idea of releasing, emptying, so that we may truly be filled. And that takes honesty. And that's what this class will start to, we'll have a conversation about. We'll use some biblical examples. We'll see kind of what does prayer look like? And Margaret, you brought up the Psalms. We'll certainly be looking at some Psalms today, or some parts of Psalms. I'm not going to go too deep into that. We'll touch on them. But what does it look like? What motivates it? And then how being in prayer and what that actually can be, how it might be different than we've previously practiced or even imagined. So that's the setup for today's discussion. And I'd love to invite any kind of reflections, either based on that or anything else that came up for you before we get into doing the readings. I see a hand there. Is that you, Marilyn? Is that intentional?
Me.
I love that.
have been holding my hand up and being rude, really, while
you're very
talking.
kind.
But what I wanted to say was that it just seems to me that your sermon last Sunday really relates in some interesting ways with what we're going to be looking at today.
That happens often, I find. Yeah. The themes that we're talking about in Bible study always find their way, and that was definitely on my heart last week for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but there's something there.
Thinking about that sermon since last Sunday, somehow it really connected with me.
Thank you. Good. Birdie.
Last week we were talking about nature, and I shared about our creek. There was something else I wanted to say about our creek today. We know that it runs through our property, but from the house, we can't see the creek. And most of the times we can't hear it. So we can go for days without really consciously thinking about this creek we have. But if there's a storm in the mountains, the next day, the creek is just rushing with water, and it's very loud. And then if we walk out our door, we can hear the creek. And one of us usually says, "Oh, the creek's high today."
Yeah.
And that reminds me of our relationship with God, because we know that God is near, but we usually go through our days not consciously aware of him or thinking about him.
Yeah.
But experiences come to our lives that make us aware of our need for God and our need to commune with him in prayer.
Yes. Beautifully said, Birdie. And I think in our humanity, oftentimes when we see, our assessment of God and God's presence is often limited to the creek that is before us. And from God's broader perspective, God sees the trickle at the start of the river or the creek, and God sees the roaring waters that are downstream of the creek, and the reservoirs and the lakes and the ponds that the creek is contributing to. And so I think that's part of our conversation, is to try to be as broad as we can as we step back into appreciating the relationship we have with God a little bit more from God's perspective, if that's possible. Certainly just trying to get out of our narrowness on our view. So I love that creek image, and I love what you said about how true it is that so often we don't think about God, but God's presence, is sort of there, and it comes to our attention at different times. Thank you. Anyone else? Bonnie.
I've been praying since I was a little kid. It's just what you learn when you go to church and vacation Bibles and all of that. And this week I got to the point I thought, I'm not sure I even know how to really pray. It's kind of become I know the format, how I learned, how people pray in church and people pray around the table or what have you. But remember last week that we lost our propane tank. Well, that started a whole domino effect. we lost our gas, and then we lost the power the next day, and then I forget what else has, but we've had several things that haven't gotten really fixed. The guys come out and, well, I mean, we got our tank full, and then the lights came back on, but other parts of it are not done. And we've spent money and still not fixed, and on and on. There's been several things that have gone wrong this week, And so I'm like, well, I don't even know how to pray. Do I pray? God, fix all these things. You know, the guy that put in the timer that didn't work, that we paid $150 for, do I pray, make him come back and fix it so we don't have to spend any more money? Do I pray for the guy to come out and fix the fireplace pilot light? And I mean, everything's going to cost us more and more and more. Are those things we should really be praying for, that specifically for these little incidents that pop up in life? Or is it, you know, and you kind of think, like you mentioned, praying for a parking place, which we've done, or I lose something and I pray and I find it. Oh, thank you, God. Well, I found it anyway. And I find this week, I just thought, I don't even know how to pray. I don't even know what to pray for. Maybe I'm praying for silly things, and maybe I should save my prayers for the big things, or maybe I'm looking at it all wrong. I'm kind of, it's like turning over a whole new page and starting over.
Oh, this is so good. Everything you just said is so good, Bonnie, because those questions you just asked are crucial. They are crucial because we all, in one way or another, as our faith lives deepen, we break down some of the old models and some of the old patterns and practices that may or may not work anymore. And if we're truly honest, that's what it takes to look at it, is to ask all of those questions. And I'm not going to sit here and give you the answers, because I trust that in the process of really asking the questions, you will find some of the deeper kind of appreciation. That's the key, though, is really all of us allowing ourselves to go into those very questions. That's where our prayer lives, we have to come through at some point in our lives, kind of a dark night of the soul with prayer, when we realize the childlike ways, the early ways, the patterns, whatever it is that we've always done may or may not work for us, or they may not meet that deeper need that we're starting to sense, and we're feeling tension and stuff. So go there and trust that in that process, God will show up, and kind of there will be increasing kind of, I don't know, even nudgings, I'll call them, that sort of help you. But I don't know how it will resolve. Kind of like maybe the what you brought up, maybe it'll feel like getting a timer that doesn't work, and all of a sudden we realize, oh my gosh, maybe it's not supposed to be on my time, and maybe the whole sense of time is something to consider. And all of these things that are happening can, in their own way, become metaphors for where we are in our prayer life, and that is all wonderful, is all exactly as it should be. That's part of what I was trying to indicate in that opening, when I was just like playing with some of those ideas, is that maybe all of that is just as it should be, Bonnie. And that's, for you, what's helping you get to that broken down place, that place of kind of release, so that maybe some sort of different filling can happen, you see? So I think there's something there, and I say just stay with that. Stay with that, because that's a crucial place to be. Thank you. Thank you. Carol?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's a very serious family that are our neighbors in Southern California. The whole family is in trauma right now. And I don't know how to pray, but what you just said, Dan, is exactly what I need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And to me, I pray that each of us can kind of be open to those questions and those difficult places, especially if our prayer may end up being, I don't know how to pray.
Exactly.
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. You know, how many times when we're in a loving relationship would an honest, I don't know, have really been a healing comment? To say, I don't know, but still be there, to still show up. that's a movement there. There's something real that happens. There's something powerful that can happen. And again, it's kind of like it helps us get out of our own way. I use the word breaking us down, but that's what humility is. That which brings us to our knees. And in some sense, metaphorically, or for some literally, it's only from our knees that we can pray, you know? So yeah, there's something really here. And I think part of it is trust those questions rather than fleeing from them or building walls to seal yourself off from them. I would say that would be, you know, more of a growth, you know, a way toward growth. Anyone else? Horty.
Maybe it's been a week of conundrums for many of us. Bonnie, when you talk about the size of things that are facing you, I've had a pretty widely divergent set of circumstances. Pardon me. And one is that my cat is gone. And she's just disappeared. She's just disappeared. And it seems kind of odd to pray to God about my cat. But I say to God, I come to you with a broken heart. You know where the cat is, but I'm coming to you with my heart. I know you're ever present. Help me find the comfort that I know you are in your presence, because I really don't have any words to say about this cat. And then 2 days later, a good friend of ours died. And he's someone that I've known for a number of years. And maybe since I retired from my profession of being involved with hospice, I haven't really been very often at a bedside as I did so often for so long. And again, my prayers were, here I am, God. My heart is broken. I know you're ever present. Help me feel your presence in these two widely divergent senses of loss. And it was almost easier when being a nurse. I had a job, I had a role, I had things to do, I had things to attend to, I had papers to sign and medications to dispose of and document. And being present at a death, just as a friend, was a very small experience in a very big way.
Yeah.
So it's been, Bonnie, it's been a week of conundrums. And what do I pray for? The peace in my friend is in his passing, his wife, who has always said, when you go, I want to go. Feels that involved in their togetherness. And so here I am, group. Here I am, God, with sort of some squashed open heart places.
Thank you, Horty. That was just beautiful and aching. And I want to say that there are so many times, I think, in our lives where we insulate ourselves with our training and our responsibilities and our jobs in the way we do things. And then there are different times when life just meets us in its full force, and where we are unprepared, where there's nothing in our training that matters. There's no way that we are insulated, and we are just raw and before it. And you showed up, And that itself is an act of love. And to be ill-equipped is maybe the best equipment, because it enabled you to express what you just said. And the prayer is less about the content of the words and more about the fact that you showed up. You were there, not only to love your friend, but to express yourself before God and to say, I'm lost, I'm feeling broken. And you say, it's funny, the word small is both, it can be a belittling, oh, that feels small to do that. Well, and I'm not saying that's how you meant it, but sometimes that's what we do. But at the same time, to feel small in relation to God is potentially an important means of release of our own self-reliance and our own sense of responsibility for everything, that we're not in control, we're not in charge, we're not equipped for everything, even though we're told, that we should be. And so it's these moments that break us down, and they can become profound opportunities to move closer to that place with God, even as we're not, it may not be our power. It's rarely, if ever, our power to heal or to cure in those instances. But what healing can come about through that pain and that presence is profound. And it often is surprising how healing happens in the midst of all this. So thank you for showing up today. Thank you for that just raw sharing that you offered. You blessed us all with that. Let's we'll leave room for other sharings like this, of course, but let's move into the readings. I'm feeling like we've primed this pump pretty well for just a few brief readings, two of which come from the Psalms and one comes from the prophet, like I said last week, the beloved Habakkuk, which is an awesome book, by the way, but he's not a prophet that we often read, and maybe that's something I need to change. But let's, if I could, they're not long, but I wouldn't mind having three different voices and just read each one, just with that sense of letting the words sink in. I'm not saying to read, to take 5 minutes to do each one, but just read it with a little bit more, intention. Maybe I didn't need to say that. I think we always do, but three readers will be good. Could I see hands? Marilyn, you can do the first one. Thank you. Not all at once. Bonnie, thank you. Did I miss any hand? Okay, and Carol. So 1, 2, 3. All right, I'm going to share this. You'll see what it is. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, just that first one there, Marilyn.
Psalm 145, verses 17 and 18. The greatness and goodness of God. The Lord is just in all his ways and kind in all his doings. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth.
Thank you. Bonnie, the next one.
Psalm 13, 1 through 3. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all day long? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep the sleep of death.
Thank you. Carol, when you're ready.
Habakkuk 1, 2-3, a prophet's complaint. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not listen, or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me wrongdoing and look at trouble? Make me see wrongdoing and look for trouble. Destruction and violence are before me. strife and contention arise.
Thank you. So the first two were from the Psalms, the worship, the worship poetry, the worship songs of ancient Israel. And then the last was from a prophet of Israel in the face of strife and life. And so I ask you to hold those. I know there's some different examples there. Hold those in your mind. We've been talking about how prayer is an opportunity to bring our doubts and our complaints and our failures before God and engage that part of our lives, be real about it. Kind of just how we've begun this conversation today. And in fact, if we avoid doing that, and I think a lot of us do, or at least at some point we do, if we avoid doing that, and if we act like everything's fine, or we're always outwardly smiling when inside we're crying or bleeding, we dishonor the relationship with God. And I ask you, how do the readings we've just shared, the diversity within them, how do they instruct us about being fully honest with God? And in what ways, if any, do those types of prayers differ from our own, or from your own practice? What instruction did you see, or insights did they give you about what prayer can look like? Bonnie?
Well, so often I think of prayer, we talked about this a little bit before, as being petitions and asking, asking you shall receive, asking for things. But this was like, the one that I read was, how long do I, wait and wait for answers? How long do I, it was much more introspection, as, seek and ye shall find kind of a passage. It was, I think, knowing David and knowing how his life went, and I don't know what was going on when he wrote this specific psalm, but in general, you kind of went over it. And I think he got to a point of real brokenness, and then looking to God for the answers, maybe not for a specific request, but just looking for, give me the answer. How long do I wait? I don't know. It's just much more introspective, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
And it's certainly not afraid to bring the questions, the raw questions there, and the pain before God, to really lift it all up. And I also want to say that when there's a reference to a prayer of David, it is not necessarily, it's been shown that it's very clear that there's no way David wrote all those literally. He may have written some of them, but oftentimes when it's of David like that, it's really a reference to the house of David. And so sometimes we can overly identify that it comes from the perspective of one person, and that's not necessarily a problem, but I think it's more universal. The Psalms are meant to be more universal than necessarily only about the life of David. Although, and please don't misunderstand, I think it can be really instructive at times to really see it from the vantage point of David, from the life that we know, and to recognize, wow, that flawed, broken person still was able to lift these powerful, words. But nonetheless, I think it's really okay and appropriate to broaden it beyond that, as you have, Bonnie, as you have. But yeah, it's about bringing those questions and maybe recognizing that we don't get to control the answers. Anyone else? How were those readings in any way instructive or provide insight to you? And/or how did they kind of challenge or meet or differ from your own way of typically praying? Marilyn?
I don't think I usually am complaining about God in my prayers. but I felt that that was certainly a part of this. How long do I have to wait? Sort of, where are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there was a real honesty, kind of a two-way relationship here.
Yes.
And that really struck me.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I think a lot of us were raised not to complain,
Mm-hmm.
or at least to look at complaint as something that is, unsightly or unseemly in a characteristic, in a quality, and look at the way we respond to complaint. Heck, even we created the name Jeremiads for the fact that Jeremiah is a book that is almost all about lament and complaint. And so he goes on these long stretches of complaint, and we've given them a name. Now, I'm not saying we're judging that per se, but I've heard people use that as a bit of a pejorative, that we treat complaint, as a negative quality. And yet here it is right before us. No problems at all. Bring your full self.
Mm-hmm.
Horty?
Obviously, however we feel at any time is affected by what we're going through. So the question of how long do I wait, as I read it, didn't seem like it was a question to God. It was a question within myself that I was bringing to God. How long? And that it was a question to myself before God.
Yeah.
And that the answer needed to come not from God, but from me. The answer, how long do I wait? As long as is necessary.
Yeah.
Until the time is right. Until you feel an answer. What is the answer? How long do I wait? How long do we all wait for anything?
Yeah.
Do we get delivered by parcel post the answer to how long we wait? I think it's much more, how do we enter into the process of allowing and receiving the abundance of God to fall into our lives?
Yes, I think that is it. And, it's particularly challenging in our culture, because our culture is constantly telling us that we don't have to wait. Waiting is bad, that we should be self-reliant, and that our strength is when we can take care of things and we don't have to approach with all these needs and wants. All of that stuff is real. It creates these problems. And maybe the question of, I love how you did it there, to ask the question of how long do I wait? We turn it back as a mirror. How long do we wait to release a sense of control, or a sense of that we need our prayers to work out the way we hope they do, or the way we expect they do, or the way they should? All those things. How long do we wait to release, to empty ourselves before God? Maybe the paradox is our prayer, this idea of being able to speak our sense of weakness or smallness or brokenness is precisely what enables God to work, what enables God's strength. And again, as we said at the beginning, it enables God to fill us in a way that we maybe haven't been. Cecily.
Recently, I've been interjecting my feelings into prayer, and I might say, I'm calling it confession. So I might say, God, I confess to you, I'm afraid, or God, I'm worried, or, I often pray giving thanks, but more recently I've been identifying a feeling when I have a need. So perhaps in the case of Bonnie, to maybe interject that feeling that you're feeling of worry, of fret. And I'm finding that helpful for myself, actually.
Yeah. And you brought up a powerful word, and this is sometimes a rub for a lot of us, but that word confession. We talk about emptying ourselves. The word confession is one that's what it's about. It's about owning and honoring where we truly are, where we feel like we've fallen down or feel broken or lost, or where we're humbled, where we've missed the mark. And acknowledging that, owning it. But the word confession, for many of us, if you're raised in the Catholic tradition, it's fraught with so much. It's often, unfortunately, enmeshed with a wagging finger and a sense of shame and punishment, even if the punishment is only a certain number of Hail Marys, as if there's a formula, a magic formula here. But it's still associated with that idea that we are wrong. But maybe confession is simply the act of emptying ourselves of all the crap that we pretend is not there, too often. And it's like, wow, how freeing that can be, when we do that. But there's so many reasons why we don't, so many reasons why it's hard to. And one of them, it has to do with the way the image of God that we have. What were you taught is God? What's the image that you carry? Okay. And I think that our ability to come before God and reveal truly who we are and to really confess and release has so much to do with the image of God that we have. And so maybe it's important to ask ourselves, what are some of the wrong images or those unhelpful or kind of damaging images that we need to retire or kick to the curb about God in order for us to be with God in ways that allow us to reveal and empty and kind of really connect. Can you think of some of those unhelpful images of God that have interfered with you? Margaret?
Well, I was always in control of my life, I thought. And my husband and I always discussed death and God. And we always figured it'd be me go first because I have asthma. And Gene was always healthy. Well, it didn't happen that way. He died in 2000. And I accepted that, but I thought, now this is silly. But I was brushing my teeth. And I thought, well, I won't need a new tube of toothpaste because I'll be dead. Well, now that was in 2000. Here I am still. And I can't tell you how many tubes of toothpaste I've bought since then. And it dawned on me, okay, God, you got control. I'll leave it to you. And I felt so much better. I felt so silly because I figured that one tube of toothpaste was enough. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I love it. No, thank you, Margaret. I mean, I'm going to smile and say thank you every time I open a tube of toothpaste now. Thank you for another tube, God. But that's what it is. It's about acknowledging even that. Why not? Because it connects you, man, that connects you to your mortality, to your humility, and to a loving memory of your husband and the pain of that. I mean, isn't it amazing how something like that, and it's often that way. It's those types of oddball that we think, memories or that things that we think are insignificant that end up being some of the most connecting stories to the greater parts of our lives. So don't dismiss any of it. Don't dismiss any of it. Marilyn?
Yeah, I want to say a little bit more about what I said, seeing the psalmist as expressing some I don't know, criticism or something of God.
Yeah, complaint in that.
Yeah, complaint of God. And the thing of it is, for me, I was raised not to ever say anything negative to anybody. There was something that I was feeling hurt about or or impatient or angry,
Yeah.
then those feelings, I just needed to deal with them. I need not to express them. I might hurt somebody. And so for me, it's very much a freeing kind of look at the relationship that I would have with God. If I could say, hey, you know, I asked you about such and such quite a while ago, and I still haven't heard. That anyway.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. And how many of us can relate to that? I know a lot of us can. And it plays out. So those ways of being that pertain to our human relationships often play out in our relationship with God and what we think is appropriate or not before God. I mean, I think a lot of us have this received message that the idea of bringing our full selves before God on a kind of esoteric level, that's fine. But in reality, we have so many compartments and rules for ourselves about what's appropriate oftentimes. And we often hold back something, whatever it is, whether it's anger or sadness or whatever kind of emotion, will hold back on it thinking it will be displeasing to God, when instead the very act of holding back is what's displeasing. So what we do is we build walls, and we build walls thinking we're protecting ourselves from making mistakes, from hurting others, from hurting God, from offending God, from displeasing God. The truth is, maybe from God's perspective, the way God sees it, is to build walls is showing a lack of trust. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's like, if we're really focused on this idea of relationship, it's potentially about where are the walls and how might I start dismantling them? And all these questions and comments that you're bringing up today, and the pain and the uncertainty and all of it, those are ways that we dismantle some of those walls and really then allow God in. So, Patty.
When I was working as a nurse, I worked with people who had catastrophic injuries. And so my work with them was often for years. And one of the things that's triggered for me right now as I listen is the idea of volition, the idea of attempting to do something. Because one of the things I saw with people who had catastrophic injuries, especially those who had PTSD, is their ability to even approach themselves, much less God, was often compromised by repeated floods of cortisol and epinephrine, and a response of lower centers than cognitive centers.
Yeah.
There wasn't choice for them. So to even begin to reflect on the choices they made in places of panic or places of repeated experience of trauma that was their trauma were confounding to me. It is not as if you could approach it. It's not as if I could approach it or approach them with any kind of solution, but to bear with them through those things. And one of the things I learned from my late husband, who was a psychologist, he said, you know, sometimes you can invite people to stay with something and let it be for 10 minutes and then invite them to change. That it doesn't stop it, but it may help to get beyond a place that's not cognitive and not choice related.
Yeah.
And that can be the only solution. And I've often thought of that in my own life too, because I've had enormous amount of challenge in some respects. And one of the things that Michael did for me was hold me for 10 minutes and say, let it all out.
Yeah.
And it didn't have to do with presence. It had to do with limiting the physiological response and allowing a change to happen before even any kind of cognitive presence with God kind of moment could happen. And I think it's really important to know that we can be taken over by a process that is not going to allow us to think at all, or to make choices. It's so important to know that, and to be it isn't even forgiving. It's to just be humble before it.
Yeah.
The thing that I learned is with some of the patients who had horrible, horrible histories already before they even came and had the horrible history they had with me, that if you stayed with people, it somehow could bring transformation sometimes. And I don't know how that works, but it is humbling and it is incredible. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you for that profound and important reflection. And I will just simply add that, as we do this kind of work in our individual prayer lives and open ourselves to kind of more humility, more honesty, I do think it plays out in our ability to be with people, to engender the same, not to force it, but to be able to be conversant with it. And what you named there, that holding for 10 minutes to release the physicality, the biology parts, or just whatever comes, but then to still be there, it's like there's something in there about being a witness to something that is different, maybe hopeful, that change is possible. It's not ours to know when, like you said, by being there with them, sometimes you got to see change and sometimes not. The patterns and the wounds of PTSD can run very deep. But to be able to be witnesses with one another through this is a profound act of love and possibility, and of sort of leaning into the wind of despair and saying, I am with you. And that to me is one of the profound messages that God has been speaking into our hearts through these ancient stories, through our prayers, is that in all of the mess, I'm with you. And it doesn't always mean that it gets taken away, but it means that sometime, some way, somehow, that healing is possible, and we do see it. And so we embrace that. Anyone else? Horty?
I can't remember when this analogy was brought into my life, but it's been helpful for me. And that is, most often when a kid is having, maybe, I don't have children, so I can't tell you that I can define a tantrum. But
You're lucky.
I'll try it harder.
I was going to say, just watch Bob every now and again.
His tantrums are of giggles. We've all had tantrums where we've thought, I'm afraid to let myself cry because I'm never going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
There's no end to what I'm feeling. And what was brought to my attention was that if you just hang with a kid, eventually they'll say, what's for lunch? There is the holding for the 10 minutes. And there is even a glimmer of a crack of, and where's the peanut butter?
Yeah.
If we give ourselves permission to stay in that place for whatever long enough means, and if someone is there, as you say, to bear witness, but just to be, there's often a crack in the cosmic egg that lets the light outside the shells shine down on us.
Yeah.
And give us just even a moment of possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's one of the models that needs to be broken, is that some of us have that idea that, God's that sort of judge in the sky that's always making a list and checking it twice, and our behavior defines our goodness. And when we make mistakes, we are a mistake, all that sort of stuff that we seem to receive, unfortunately. And that idea, that simple word that you said, permission to be and to offer who we are really before God. That is our prayer. That is a prayer. In the brokenness, in the anger, in the fact that maybe we're sitting right now and something's roiling inside of us. All of that is prayer. And if it is ever to be emptied, it needs to be offered. We can't empty something that's never offered. So that's the paradox, is that our emptying allows God's strength to be possible, to be shown, to be made known to us, in us, through us. So maybe those models, those ideas of God. I used to have the idea, when I was a kid, the Geppetto image. God's in control of everything. And as an adult, I can still sort of say that, but not mean it the way I did when I was a kid. That ultimately this sense of presence and love and creative energy that sets the world and the universe in motion is not one that is about micromanaging everything. I cut the strings to that model. I told Geppetto, thank you, but he can go back to his movie. And that God is something else than that. Just little examples, little ways that there's some of these images that we carry forward that can really impact the permission we give ourselves to be whatever before God. Anyone else about that? So let's go, let's play a little bit more then with what Cecily brought up. And I touched on it a little bit, but this idea of emptying and, practical ways that we step forward into prayer and kind of allow that emptying to happen. One of the practical ways and time-honored ways is the act of confession. And as I said, that is a term that is often fraught, but it really is a powerful and beautiful tool of honesty, of humility. And so I ask then, what role do you think in your own life confession can play or does play? Or what challenges have you experienced with the idea of confession in your life that make it something that you have either maybe shied away from? And how do you think it can be a tool that allows you to build a prayer relationship with God? We often do confession in our church as a group prayer. We don't have confessionals one-on-one as often, but oftentimes confession is a component of conversation, for sure, when I have meetings with people. So it's a tool. But I'm just asking you, what's your sense of connection in your life to that term, that practice, and how might you see it as valuable or challenging? Cecily and then Horty.
For me, I chose to incorporate that word into my prayer because I grew up sort of under a domineering father. And so I held everything in. And, perhaps in society, somehow I got the message it's not okay to express myself. So more recently, I'm able to say, no, I do have feelings. And I'm not in control so much. Things are happening and I can identify that, God, I'm worried, God, I'm angry, or God, I'm hurt. And I'm confessing that this is how I am feeling.
Yeah. That's a profound move. That is a profound move. And that to me is one of the things that is if there's little points of transformation, that is just one that's so deep with potential, because it doesn't necessarily provide answers to do what you just said, to release, to confess like that. But it opens us, it empties us so that there might be room for something new actually to break in. And when we release the control, when we own who we are. You know, if we say God already knows it anyway, what are we hiding from? Well, a lot of us are hiding from, we don't want to let God down by actually saying it, by owning it, you know, that kind of thing, whatever it is. But truly, confessional at its best is incredibly liberating. And it frees us, even that, as you said, even just to acknowledge that we have feelings that are legitimate. To be able to say those in front of God and then to know that God loves us, not despite that, but because of that, it's amazing. And it compares to a lot of the ways we've lived our lives in terms of the relationships we've had. We often hold back on sharing our feelings in relationships, and we think that that's to protect the other. And I do this too, even as a husband. I don't always express my emotions very well. And what I'm learning and what I'm seeing is how that impacts the intimacy, the real sense of knowing someone. Same with God. Allowing ourselves to be known. Permission, that allowance. It's a huge step in moving towards depth of life, depth of prayer, and depth of our humanity. There was another, did I, Horty, did I get to you? No, I think I did. So Horty and then Steve.
Have that morning frog. I grew up in the Episcopalian tradition, and there's some really, for me, throughout my life, because if I was not dead, I was in church on Sunday. So there was a lot of consistency in my attending of church. And there's some really beautiful prayers on our knees of confession, of I've done the things I shouldn't do. I haven't done the things I ought to have done. In that place, there's little help in me. And I just pour it all out there. And I remember sort of struggling with some of that. And a young seminarian said, you know, the hardest part of saying you're sorry is really believing you'll be forgiven. And you think about when you apologize to a friend and they say, it's okay. You go, they don't really mean it. They're not going to forget that. You know, I really overstepped the bounds this time. And again, because of the influence of my Episcopalian background, we were raised with the Trinity, the idea of God as the Trinity. And I don't know, I took it hook, line, and sinker. I didn't have any problem with that. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, sure, absolutely. You know, the ice cube melting into the ice, going into the steam and all that kind of stuff. It was fine with me. And somehow throughout this study group on prayer, something that just came to me as a concept, an idea, a possibility, you know, another maybe set of labels, was experiencing God as the source, the essence, and the process. And that there's really, it's ineffable. It's not describable. It's not holdable. It's God is this, for me, the source of everything. And the essence of that which is happening, my feelings, my thoughts, my emotions, my so-called successes, my stumbling blocks, and the process of being with it, getting through it, moving on, remembering the whole. I always love your word of messiness. Right?
Yeah. It's kind of, you're reminding me of that image that we talked about last week, when a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly, it needs to wrap itself up in a tight space and turn into a pile of goo. Pretty messy. before the wings can form. And God is a part of all of that. And it's not necessarily about assigning value before we maybe do the first work of accepting, of really deeply acknowledging, of allowing ourselves to see what that can open up, to really say that and to live that. And I do think you're onto something, that some of us struggle with confession because we really struggle with the idea that we are forgivable, that forgiveness can happen, that it can mean something. A lot of us, when someone offends us or does something that hurts us and they ask for our forgiveness, a lot of us brush it off. Oh, it was nothing. Don't worry about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what it may do is it might devalue the power of forgiveness. Because really, when we say, it's nothing, we may really be meaning, I forgive you. But we don't say it sometimes because I don't know, then it holds us to account. And then it makes us say, oh my gosh, forgiveness is real. Our ability to practice forgiveness is our ability to receive it. And so pay attention to those moments and allow yourself to give someone the gift of receiving their request for forgiveness with a very intentional, yes, I forgive you and I love you. That sort of thing. Those acts, it breaks things open. It breaks down some of those walls too. And or it maybe it might alert us to a place that we didn't realize we had a wall. Oh my gosh, I have a block about forgiveness. That's okay. Seeing it is the first step. I mean, that's what we have to do. And then asking those questions, being in the mess with it. Why is that here? Or, and maybe we can go down some rabbit holes and we pull back and say, look, I just released this, God. It is here. I struggle with forgiveness. I struggle with being a forgiving person. That sort of thing. And see what happens as we empty ourselves. Maybe something else can finally reach us. I had seen Steve first and then Patty.
Yeah, I'd just like to relate my childhood. I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic grade school, 1st grade to 8th grade. And church was 6-day-a-week occurrence. And on every Friday, we would dutifully go over to the chapel and do our confessions so that we could be in grace and receive Holy Communion on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And I have to confess here, to coin a phrase, that I was often made up bad things about myself so I could confess them. And looking back, it sounds so ludicrous that I would do that. Because, as a 8-10-year-old kid, I mean, how many bad things can you do in a week? Yeah. It wasn't like you're a bad person at all. So I just want to relate that because I hadn't thought about it until you brought the whole deal with confession up to me. And as a result of my upbringing as a child in this grade school, I don't confess to anybody anymore except God.
Yeah.
But I think he's the only one listening anyway.
Oh, it's such a classic story though, Steve, about that idea, and it's within the context of confessional. And as a child, in a sense, making up stuff to share with the priest is a way we can kind of make ourselves look good, because we're doing it right. We're doing it well. We're really letting it go. And it's sort of just another potentially illustration of how we seek in so many ways to look good before God, as if that's what is asked for. And it's so wonderful because it's completely, like you say, it's completely relatable. And if we're really honest, a lot of us are still doing it today. I mean, maybe all of us. It's how we are. It's partly because it's a bit of a defense mechanism. To be vulnerable in those ways all the time invites a lot more in, we allow more to penetrate us, and can be tiresome for sure. for sure. But let's not lose sight of how liberating that can be too. And this move into emptying is what allows for filling. But thank you for that, because it's I think any of us can smile, if not remember those kinds of opportunities, those moments. Let's see, was it Patty? I think, yeah, Patty.
One of the things I feel about confession is that it has a tinge of judgment. It's kind of, we've been taught, some of us have been taught, that we started out with Adam and Eve got us all in trouble. So there's a badness, and there's an essential badness, and it manifests itself in a lot of ways. And I think of what Cicely said about just saying, God, I'm afraid, I'm sad, or whatever. The idea of confession can be broader than judging who is good and who is bad. It can just be a form of beginning to see and to wonder how things are. And they're broader than good and bad. Good and bad gets in the way. Wonder is like, gosh, this is happening, but it's connected to this. A person who hurts you is probably hurt and has been hurt. And if they hurt you, it may be in you only and not in them, not intentional. And to begin to wonder about process, as Horty was talking about, and to expand beyond the fear of being good or bad, or right or wrong, or amazing or not, is liberating.
Absolutely.
And it's also a place of great holiness. It's bigger than I am. And that's all I can say.
Yeah, thank you. It's powerful stuff. To be confronted with whatever comes up when some of these ideas, so confession, connecting to judgment, confession by itself has nothing to do with judgment, but we have overlaid it with that. And to remove the wagging fingers and replace them by the open arms may be, something that is a helpful image. There might be other ones that are helpful, but it's about constantly breaking that, because to be worried about our behavior and as if that's what's going to save us, and then it still puts it back on as if we're in control. See how that works? It's like we're loved both despite and because of all that we already are. And that acceptance and that reality is what actually frees us to grow beyond what we already are, and all the experiences and all the mess that makes us who we are now. So there's something very powerful about being able to see where we bump into it, where we bump into our sense of limitation or hurt or anger or disengagement from certain things. When we see those walls, when we bump into that, it's really good to go there and to look without judgment. See, okay, what is this? And to do it with a lightness. And as you said, it is holy. It's a holy act to allow ourselves to do that. And I just think it's one of those things that as we do that, it just breaks open a whole new realm of depth, of possibility in our prayer. Thank you. Is there anyone else that had a comment? Yes, Judy.
Several things are going through my mind this whole time. I feel like the whole purpose of being here is to basically do life, that we are here to live life, whatever that means. And I've never really looked to religion for the rules. They feel more self-generated. This is what good behavior would look like. So, hurt in this way, or I'm struggling this way. And so in that way, it feels more conversational with God. And if I feel like I'm really falling short, not struggling, but like maybe feeling I'm behaving badly, I often will turn it back on God and say, hey, you made me, you own some of this. I'm working with what I've got here. And so, kind of help me out, give me some clues. So there's that. And then the other thing that came to mind was when I do feel, and I have had this feeling a lot of my life, not in the last couple of years, that I will be punished. But I held that feeling at the same time I believed in an all-loving God. And I'm starting to think that that wasn't anything to do with religion. I think it's parental or societal, that's where I'm feeling the punishment is coming.
Yeah, Judy, we made it through most of that. It kind of froze there at the end.
Oh,
but
no need to repeat.
Okay, but it was really profound, and I think that's part of that awareness that you've come to. It's a practice. It's something that's okay. Let's try this. Let's examine those ideas and those images that still are within us, that kind of can really weigh on us, and really look at, are they serving? What are they serving? Are they serving fear? Are they serving love? Are they serving growth? Or are they serving stagnancy? Really, am I building walls, or am I opening myself? And am I open to receiving? Those kinds of practices, while in and of themselves may not be the full answer, they start to get us, steps along the path. And that's really what we're about, that movement of growth, of movement towards Jesus, walking the way, so to speak. But thank you for saying that, for acknowledging that. Any other person? I do have homework to assign this week, so I'm glad you all stayed with me. I hope those that had to drop off will watch this. But so I want you to read, and this is in the notes, so it'll be up on the church website, hopefully. But I want you to read a sequence of 10 Psalms, basically Psalm 35 to Psalm 44. Read all 10 of them. Okay, they're not super long. And list what they teach you about prayer. Just whatever insights they provide, whatever instruction, however you wanted to see it, whatever speaks to you, put it down. And then consider, does that sequence of prayer, does it invite you to take more risks? Does it invite yourself into a different sense of relationship with prayer and with God? Does it invite you to express more passion? Challenge yourself to be vulnerable with it, interact with it, and come back next week and say, I feel like it opened this up in me, or it didn't, whatever it is. How do you respond? So make the list of how it instructs you, how it's instructive about prayer, and then consider and be ready to share, if you'd like, how that it impacts you, how it challenges you in your relationship with prayer and with God. Sound good? Psalms 35 to 44. Okay. I look forward to all of our sharing about that next week. But I have to say, this has been a wonderful class. Every one of them has. I appreciate just your willingness to go to those deep places, questioning places, to share some of the places of deep joy and aching beauty or aching sorrow in your life. And it is all beautiful. So I really honor the sharing that you all provide here, and just know that it's held in such a vessel of communion, of loving, family here. So thank you all for that. And look forward to, continuing to open up with each other in the coming weeks. Till we meet again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Dan.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all.